Good morning. This is Northern Light for Wednesday, July 19th. I'm Monica Sandreski.
And I'm Todd Moe.
2 anti-LGBTQ incidents have been reported to Saranac Lake Police in the past couple of weeks, and one queer activist worries they could escalate. Also, rebuilding efforts continue in Adirondack communities hit by last week's heavy rains. We'll talk with the owners of the historic Hemlock Hall in Blue Mountain Lake.
We're really hopeful with the progress that's been made. We have a really long road ahead of us. And when we talk about opening this year, we have a small season where we get our business in, and we have to determine at a point what can be opened.
It's county fair season, and state officials say they're running full-bore inspections to make sure rides at fairgrounds and midways and carnivals this summer are safe.
The very first thing is going to be trip hazards in and off the rides, especially dealing with little kids. They come through that gate, they want to run. They're excited.
And NCPR has hosted live storytelling events told by your neighbors for years. Now The Howl is a storytelling podcast. We'll hear from host Ethan Shanty coming up. All of that and more is just ahead on Northern Light. Stick with us.
Broadcast of Northern Light here on North Country Public Radio is supported by Mountain Orthotic and Prosthetic Services, a full-service practice committed to providing care for patients of all ages, with offices in Lake Placid, Plattsburgh, and Malone. Details and referrals at mountainonp.com. And by Blue Seed Studios, Saranac Lake, promoting community involvement in the arts on the web at bluseedstudios.org.
This is Northern Light. I'm Monica Sandreski.
And I'm Todd Moe. 2 acts of anti-LGBTQIA plus vandalism have been reported in Saranac Lake in the past few weeks. According to the Adirondack Daily Enterprise, the first incident happened at the Tri-Lakes Pride Festival when a rainbow balloon arch was destroyed. Then last week, someone removed a transgender pride flag at the home of Adirondack North Country Gender Alliance Executive Director Kelly Metzgar. Metzgar is a transgender woman and has lived in the village for about 40 years. She reported that the metal bracket holding the flag was broken too. This comes just months after someone destroyed an intersex pride flag she'd hung up at her home. Metzgar says the Saranac Lake Police Department has been notified of both incidents. She says she worries that the incidents could escalate or turn violent. She told the paper she wants local people to be angry and fight back by waving flags, wearing pins, and not letting hate win.
The owners of an historic resort in Blue Mountain Lake say they will rebuild after last week's flooding washed away a local road, parking areas, and most of their beachfront property. Dozens of guests at Hemlock Hall were evacuated by boat and van last Tuesday and were brought to a shelter at Indian Lake Central School.
This is the third summer that Tony and Chelsea Provost have owned the resort. With the storm hitting at the peak of summer tourism, they're hoping to salvage some of the season. Tony and Chelsea told me yesterday that road repair crews and volunteers have been working nearly every day for the past week.
We've had a construction team on site every day except Sunday, working well into the night on all the repairs. So we've got our road put back together so you can go in and out of the property. You can make it back down our main footpath. That brings you down to the majority of our cabins and also our waterfront. We're just trying to stay as optimistic as possible. Progress is being made at a much faster rate than expected. So that's been, giving us some hope on recovering some of this season.
Where was most of the damage? Was it structural? Was it landscape? Was it the road and some of the driveways?
Yeah, so it was mostly landscape, land erosion. So we lost the majority of our main parking lot. We lost the main road that goes right through the center of our property, and which is a private road. And then we also lost, our footpath, and we also lost our beachfront. So our beach, sustained tons of deposits down there. So we need to get that all squared away before we can, have our waterfront accessible again to guests.
Chelsea, tell me a little bit about last week. Were you folks there at Hemlock Hill when the rain started, and what was that like?
Tony and I actually live off property, and it's my mother who lives on property. So she called Tony and I at around 11:30 Monday night, and that's when Tony came on property. I stayed home. We have two small kids, so they were sleeping, so I stayed home and tried to make phone calls to 911 and the sheriff's office from home. Tony was here for the actual evacuation of the guests down at the our Water's Edge cottage, which is the one right on the water, and they took in water that night and had the videos from the middle of the night are around that cottage, and we had to evacuate them. Was it 2:30? Around 2:30 in the morning. A couple firemen from Blue Mountain Lake came to assist in that evacuation.
Hemlock Hall was built in Blue Mountain Lake back in the 1890s, and Tony says his family has had a connection to the property for decades.
My dad started coming here at the age of 2, so he's been here since then and went to school for accounting, started working with his dad, and Dad bought the place with my mom in 86. And we've been involved with Hemlock for 75 years now on the Provo side of the family, and then the property itself has been here for 125 years, since 1898.
And so you're the next generation.
Yeah, so me and my wife took over from my dad in 2021. So this is our third season as owners and operators.
So there's a legacy here for both of you. There's sort of this history and legacy, and it sounds to me like you're in it for the long run. You're saying, okay, this is a bump in the road, but we're going to get through this.
Exactly. Yeah, I couldn't say it any better. Exactly.
Like Tony said, we're really hopeful with the progress that's been made. We have a really long road ahead of us. And when we talk about opening this year, we're losing our peak season. We have a short season. We're mid-June to Columbus Day, October 9th. So we have a small season where we get our business in, and we have to determine at a point what can be opened. So it's likely going to be a portion because there is still a ton of work to be done. We call them our motels and our smaller cottages. We haven't even begun over there yet. So stay tuned. I've told folks, follow us on Facebook. As soon as we know a reopening plan, we'll announce it. And we really appreciate people's support. We also have an Airbnb that's connected to Hemlock Hall. It's in Blue Mountain Lake, called the Hemlock House. So we've had some guests, book over there, and then they actually are coming over to volunteer.
Chelsea and Tony Provost own Hemlock Hall in Blue Mountain Lake. They say they have a long road yet, but before reopening, but they remain optimistic that they'll be able to reopen part of the resort later this summer. They have a Facebook page with more information, and we'll post a link to that page on our website later this morning at ncpr.org.
New Yorkers are facing another round of unhealthy air this week. Smoke from Canadian wildfires continues to impact air quality around the Midwest and East Coast. State officials say New Yorkers may need to get used to the hazy, unhealthy air since wildfires could burn in Quebec and Ontario through the summer and fall. WAER's Natasha Semyonovich has more.
24 million acres of woodland. That's how much has already burned up in Canada, says DEC Commissioner Basil Sagos. He was joined at a press conference on Monday by a few of the more than 24 New York State forest rangers who were back from the Quebec province. They'd been up north since mid-June. That's not where you typically find them in the summer, says Sagos.
Usually by the time July and August roll around, we are in western states. Think about the big fires in the Pacific Northwest, California, Alaska. So it's a unique occurrence, really, to have now our third crew returning to New York from Sagos
Sagos notes New York State has avoided a potentially dangerous dry spell thanks to all the recent rain. However, he says officials are bracing for more fires like these in our region.
What we're experiencing now with our air quality, with the fires in Canada, is a result of a changing climate. We, as state, provincial governments, national governments, are fighting to catch up with the new normal. And the new normal seems to change week to week, month to month, year to year.
What won't change too quickly, says Sagos, are the current wildfires. Rain is forecast this week in Quebec and other parts of Canada, but the blazes across such rugged terrain are extensive. Sagos and the forest rangers believe only Mother Nature will put them out later this year. Until then, we should expect more air quality alerts in central New York. In Syracuse, I'm Natasha Sinanovich for North Country Public Radio.
You're listening to Northern Light here on North Country Public Radio. It's 11 minutes past 8. Good morning. I'm Todd Moe.
And I'm Monica Sandreski. Just ahead, NCPR's Ethan Shanty stops by the show to promote the new Howl Story Slam podcast. It launches today. That conversation coming up in just a few minutes right here on North Country Public Radio, which depends on donations from friends just like you to help keep critical news and information and conversations available throughout our region. Support your summer station now with a donation at ncpr.org/give. And thank you so much for your support.
This is music by the group You Bred Raptors out of Hofmeister, New York. Northern Light is supported by North Country Children's Museum, Potsdam, with hands-on and minds-on exhibits and programs for children 12 and under and their families. Open Wednesday to Sunday, 10 to 5, northcountrychildrensmuseum.org. And St. Lawrence Nurseries in Potsdam, providing the North Country with cold-hardy fruit and nut trees for nearly 100 years. slngrow.com.
School lunches may have more food from New York State in the coming school year. The state's Board of Regents voted unanimously to increase the amount a school district can spend on food and milk products. Regent Frances Willis says it's a positive shift for schools and the state's agriculture market.
I'm hoping there'll be some type of a advertising, if you will, campaign in the schools so students understand, because this is a piece of civic engagement and becoming knowledgeable and supportive of local agriculture is significant.
The cap on local purchases was raised from $100,000 to $150,000 per district. The new rule takes effect this week as an emergency measure. The Board of Regents expects to vote again in November to make the new rule permanent.
Swimming is prohibited at Plattsburgh City Beach until further notice. The city says test results from a water sample collected Monday showed elevated levels of E. coli. According to the Mayo Clinic, signs and symptoms of E. coli infection include diarrhea, stomach cramping, and nausea. The beach remains open to the public for non-swimming recreation. City staff will conduct daily water quality tests until they get a clear result, which will allow swimming to resume.
County fairs are starting to open all across New York. The state's labor department says they're dispatching inspectors to make sure all of the rides on the Midway are safe. Karen DeWitt has the details.
New York's Labor Commissioner Rebecca Reardon and other officials appeared at Tuesday's opening of the Saratoga County Fair to reassure the public that the rides are closely monitored. Reardon says this summer, as usual, state inspectors are checking all the rides at fairs, amusement parks, and carnivals, and none are permitted to operate without a permit.
Last year alone, they inspected over 7,000 rides statewide, leaving no stone unturned to ensure that everyone is in compliance with rigorous safety inspections. If a ride is up and running at the Saratoga County Fair, that means it has been inspected and it's deemed safe to ride for the appropriate audiences.
Those rides include a circle of glittering, revolving miniature tractors designed for some of the youngest fair visitors.
And remember, boys and girls, you must keep your arms and legs inside and remain seated for the whole ride.
Kelly House is the safety supervisor for Amusements of America. It owns and operates many of the rides offered here. She says she's always eyeing them for potential hazards, like making sure the path to the little tractors is clear.
Your very first day is going to be trip hazards in and off the ride. That is very, as the first day, it's especially dealing with little kids. They come through that gate, they want to run. They're excited. Okay? Your second thing is always going to be your safety restraints.
Everyone is required to wear a seatbelt. House works closely with Labor Department inspectors like Brian DeStephanis.
So the inspection process actually starts when the operator...
DeStephanis jumps on the platform to demonstrate how a ride is inspected.
Generally, I'm looking for signs of wear, tear, broken parts, modifications maybe that weren't part of the original manufacturer's manual.
He bends down to lift the tarp over the mechanical center of the ride to make sure that the torque values on the nuts and bolts are correct and that the moving parts have been oiled properly. He says he also looks to make sure the ride is level and it's operating at the right speed and is free from any potential electrical hazards, especially during this rainier than average summer.
All the while I'm looking at the condition of any electrical or hydraulic wires and components. I want to see that that's rated for the load capacity that this ride is going to operate at, and it's rated for the type of conditions, potential wet locations like the Carnival Fairgrounds might have.
DeStephanis says he or another inspector will come back unannounced more than once during the week to 10 days that the fair is operating.
Thank you, boys and girls, for riding the tractor ride. Come back and see us again, and please be careful getting off of the ride.
At the Saratoga County Fairgrounds, I'm Karen DeWitt.
You're listening to Northern Light right here on North Country Public Radio. I'm Todd Moe.
And I'm Monica Sandreski. Coming up in just a minute, Ethan Shanty stops by to promote the new Howl Story Slam podcast from NCPR. It launches today. Then stick around after the show for Bird Note just ahead at 8:42. But first, Todd has a look at the weather for us.
Weather Service says a mix of sun and clouds today. Sunshine in places like Glens Falls, Lake George, Watertown, Fort Drum, the Tug Hill. Partly sunny skies elsewhere. Highs today upper 70s, low 80s. Light winds out of the southwest. Then maybe some scattered showers tonight with a low around 60. And maybe some scattered rain tomorrow and Friday as well. The Weather Service says highs upper 70s, low 80s. Maybe even some scattered rain into Saturday. Right now we have mostly sunny here in Canton and 63 degrees.
So here at NCPR, we're sort of nuts for storytelling. For years, the station has collaborated with the Adirondack Center for Writing to host the Howl Story Slam, these live storytelling events at usually breweries throughout the North Country where your neighbors or anyone can sign up to tell a true 5-minute story based on the night's theme. Well, we always record those storytelling events, and today NCPR is launching the Howl podcast. The show is available on all streaming platforms and from our website. Each week, listeners will be able to hear great stories that reflect life in our region. And Ethan Shanty, who you know from the air, is our podcast guy and host of the show, and he joins us now to tell us about the podcast. Oh, great. He showed up. Sorry. Ethan, how are you?
Hi, Monica. I'm good. Thank you.
Good. Well, so why are you bringing these stories to a podcast?
Well, you talked about how fun it is to be at these events. We've been doing it for years, and I felt it was really, really important for us to bring these stories to a wider audience, not just the 50 or 60 people who come to the events. And so many of these stories are really funny and heartwarming and nostalgic, and I knew it's something that our audience would love. So it's not always possible to get out to one of those events, so it's a little bit like bringing the Howl Story Slam to you wherever you are. And, like a lot of people, I love to listen to podcasts when I'm driving or when I'm doing work around the house, but none of the podcasts that I listen to feature stories that are about our region that we live in. And that's what I wanted to do with the Howl, bring stories of the North Country right to our fans wherever they want to listen.
Well, and how did these stories do that, do you think? Could they only take place like here in this place, do you think?
Yeah. Although not like all of the stories are about living in the North Country, they all come from people who are part of our region and whose perspectives are, influenced and inspired by being here. And, some of the stories are about camping and hunting, which is certainly some of our favorite things to do here.
Yeah. And this is your first hosted show at NCPR. How are you feeling about it being front and center?
Yeah, it was kind of like an unusual experience to be asked to do it because I've been a music show host on other radio stations for years. I'm a musician and I'm a poet, so I've performed a lot. I've always had a front-facing career, but I've never done something quite like this. So with the Howl podcast, I went through our archives and I found what I think are some of the best and most interesting stories that we've ever captured on stage. And then I had to think very seriously about how I connected with them and what they meant to me. So what folks will hear when they push play on the show isn't just the story from our friends and neighbors in the North Country, but I'm actually introducing each story with my own anecdote. So that's pulled from my personal experiences. So I do end up talking a lot about playing music or my experience with my mentors and family and my connection to the North Country.
Well, and I think that's sort of part of the secret sauce here is that for one, with your years as a poet and your experience with that and that even just on a practical level, just how you understand creative structure and narrative so well. Also, I've read your poetry. It's your word choice, it's lovely.
Thank you.
And also, too, that you are from the North Country.
Yeah.
This is your place that, impacts the way that you see and how you see things. And I was wondering if you could tell me about one of those experiences that you're sharing without spoiling too much.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So there's a story that we use, which is coming up in one of the upcoming episodes in a couple weeks, with Aaron Todd, who's told lots of stories on the Howl stage. He tells us about this experience that he had with butting heads with an English teacher who really put him on a path that he'd follow for much of the rest of his life after he got a bad grade on a presentation. And so it made me think about my mentor, Maurice Kenny, who I studied with at SUNY Potsdam. Yeah. I took quite a few writing classes with him in independent studies, and during my final year, he basically insisted that I take his poetry workshop, which I absolutely did not want to do. I didn't like poetry. I didn't know how to write it. I just wanted to work on fiction, and he was like, you don't have a choice about that. I'm not asking you. I'm telling you. Yeah. And I protested about it, and eventually, I caved and I took it, and then, it became something that I'm really, really passionate about and that I work on every day. And so that leads us to Aaron's experience and how this relationship was initially pretty adversarial, but really shaped the course of his life.
Well, and so why don't we hear a clip of Aaron's story?
Yeah, sure. This is Aaron Todd. He told this story live on stage at the Grand Slam this year in Saranac Lake. His story starts in the summer of 1993, right before he meets his high school bully, his English teacher, Mad Dog Martin.
It was a tough start to my summer because I'd gotten a letter in the mail that said, "Welcome to my class. Here's a list of books. Please read one." And I said, "This is my summer. You are invading my summer. This is my space." And I was really upset about it. But I said, you know what? First impressions are really, really important. So I'm going to pick the longest book on this list, and I'm going to show you. So I read The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. And I knew I had to do an oral report, so I started putting it together. And I wrote this sweeping narrative about the Joad family's journey from Oklahoma to California, their escape from the Dust Bowl, their survival through the Depression. So it comes the day for my presentation, and I get up and I deliver the best damn speech Canton High School has ever seen. And a couple days later, I get it back, and it's got a red 85 with a circle around it. And if I delivered the best damn speech that Canton High School has ever seen, and that's only an 85, what can I possibly do?
So that was Aaron Todd, one of the many storytellers featured on the Howl podcast. His episode isn't out yet. There's 3 episodes out today. You'll be able to hear that one in just a couple of weeks, wherever you get your podcasts.
That was really lovely to hear. And I'm excited to listen to his entire story. Side note, I just bought a meat smoker from Aaron. Thank you.
Oh, really?
Aaron. Yeah. But do you have any other favorites that really stood out?
Yeah, the debut episode with Jerry McGovern. I chose the story just because I was like so captivated by it, and I've been thinking about it the whole time that I've been making these episodes. So Jerry McGovern is the storyteller on the very first episode, talking about how he feels like he's constantly like kind of having to cover up his mistakes to his wife, even though they've been together for like decades. He kind of can't believe that she puts up with him with all the stuff he's getting into. It's this really, really sweet story, and the story that he tells on stage in this episode, also in Saranac Lake, starts when his arthritis is flaring up after he's been working outside on a beer wagon in the rain all day, and he goes to take some ibuprofen for the pain.
At the same time, we had a wonderful Labrador Retriever. She also had some difficulties. She was a bit arthritic, and sometimes I had to lift her into the truck when I was taking her to Osable Point. And for her, the veterinarian had recommended and prescribed Rimadyl as an anti-inflammatory. And so that's what we gave her. Anyway, when I came back from that day working the beer wagon, I knew that I was already in pain and I was only going to get worse. So I grabbed some pills and swallowed them. And as I was putting the pill bottle back into the cupboard, I said, uh-oh. And you might think to yourself, how could he be so stupid? Well, that's not a question we stupid people ask ourselves. So anyway, I began to think this could be complicated.
That was Jerry McGovern telling his true story live on stage at the Howell Grand Slam earlier this year. You can hear the full story on the debut episode of the Howell podcast, available on all streaming platforms and at ncpr.org/Howell. Ethan Shanty is the host of the show, which premieres today. Ethan, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks, Monica. Make sure you click follow wherever you get your podcasts. And if you head to our website too, ncpr.org/Howell, you'll be able to find out when we're telling stories in your community and maybe end up on the show one day.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Music by Colton guitarist Paul Myers. And you can join Paul Myers and Phoebe Hunt, singer-songwriter, fiddler Phoebe Hunt, Thursday night. That's tomorrow night at the Norwood Village Green Concert Series. Paul Myers and Phoebe Hunt on stage in the Norwood Village Green tomorrow night, 7 o'clock. And check more information, nvgcs.org. That's the website for the Norwood Village Green Concert Series.
So many events going on throughout the region, including in Malone right now at the Downtown Artists Center. They're hosting an exhibit featuring two people called The Practice of the Wild and a State of Wonder. It features the work of Holly Friesen and Peter Aitken and their acrylic and oil paintings on display now through mid-August. You can find out more from downtownartistcellar.com. So you hear the music. That is it for the show for the day. Morning Edition continues in just a minute. Then coming up later this morning on what new Alzheimer's drugs can promise patients. That conversation between 10 and 11 o'clock right here on North Country Public Radio. If you miss an episode of the show, never fear. You can listen back to the archive any place you can get your podcast. While you're there, you can also subscribe to the station's newest podcast, the Howl Story Slam podcast. That's it for the show. I'm Monica Sandreski.
And I'm Todd Moe. Thanks for listening. Be well.